Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have The Runaway Girls by Jacqueline Wilson, starting from the very beginning, chapter 1. The smell of Sunday dinner stays in the house all afternoon. It seeps into the velvet curtains and floral wallpaper in the dining room and wafts all the way upstairs to the schoolroom. Roast beef, golden Yorkshire pudding, gravy, crispy roast potatoes, carrots and peas, and then rose-red plum tart with vanilla custard. I don't get to eat it, of course. The new mother insists it's far too rich for a little girl. I have a small portion of minced beef and a scoop of mashed potatoes. They stick in my throat without gravy. I'm allowed custard for pudding, but not plum tart. I have prunes. They're plums that have died, horrible wrinkled black things that stain the custard a dirty brown. They have stones inside. I put them in a ring around the rim of my bowl and count them. Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief. Nurse told me the rhyme and said I would end up marrying one of these men when I grew up. I imagined them all crowding into the nursery, the tinker with his pots and pans, the tailor with pins in his mouth, the soldier with a musket, the sailor dancing the hornpipe, the rich man greedily counting gold coins, the poor man in his threadbare suit, the beggar man with his cap held out, the thief snatching my gold bangle. I decided I don't want to marry any of them. I prefer to be a single lady like Nurse. I sometimes played the tinker-tailor game with my marbles too, scooting them across the slippery nursery oilcloth. Nurse used to kneel down and play marbles with me, but Nurse isn't here anymore, and I'm not allowed to play with any of the normal toys on a Sunday. I'm only allowed my Sunday doll. She lies in a long brown cardboard box like a little coffin the rest of the week. She's too valuable to play with daily. The new mother gave her to me when she came back from Paris with Papa. She is a grown-up doll in an elaborate blue silk costume and a miniature matching parasol. She wears tiny white gloves on her hands and kid boots on her feet with buttons like pinheads. Her blonde curls are mostly hidden by her bonnet. I'm not allowed to take it off to brush them. I mustn't undress her either, but I've peeped up her skirt to check she's wearing drawers. They're white and edged with lace. I've called her Ermintrude. She looks very haughty, and if she doesn't like me touching her, well, she has a beautiful wax complexion, pale with pink cheeks and blue glass eyes that stare at me. She's staring at me now. I think she's as bored as I am. I stand on the windowsill in the sunlight so she can look out onto the garden. I'm not allowed to go down and play there while it's so very hot. This is Sunday rest time. Why do I always feel so restless when it's rest time? Miss Groan is certainly resting. I can hear her snores from the room next door. The grandfather clock downstairs in the hall chimes the 3/4 hour. Why does time go so slowly on a Sunday? I'm not allowed to read any of my storybooks either, only the Bible. I've had enough of the Bible already today. I've spent 2 endless hours in church this morning, fidgeting on the hard pew seat, with Miss Groan digging me in the ribs to make me sit still. She made me learn 10 verses of the Bible by heart this morning before breakfast, though I think I've forgotten them already. I'm sure Miss Groan chooses the hardest verses deliberately. Miss Groan is my governess, and my goodness, she makes me groan. She signs her name Miss J. M. Groan. Those initials filled me with delight when she first came to our house. I so hoped she was called Joan Moan Groan. She's actually boring Jessica Mary. Jessica Mary sounds attractive, like a jolly little girl in a story, but there is nothing jolly or little or girlish about Miss Groan. She's a plain woman with a big nose and a big chin. Have you ever seen a Punch and Judy show at the seaside? Miss Groan is the spitting image of Punch. She has a little stick just like Punch's too. She prods me with it when I'm too slow to learn. When I'm naughty, she hits me with it. She does, truly. Well, a little rap across my knuckles. That's hitting, isn't it? I'm sure nursery governesses are not allowed to hit their pupils. I pluck up my courage and told Papa when she was next at home. He has to go away a lot on business. He sighed and said, "Oh dear, Lucy Lockett, have you been behaving badly? Still, it's not Miss Groan's place to chastise you. I'll have a word with the wretched woman." I'm not really called Lucy Lockett. My name is Lucy Alice May Browning, but Papa calls me Lucy Lockett after the girl in the nursery rhyme. Lucy Lockett lost her pocket. Kitty Fisher found it. Nothing in it, but the ribbon round it. He used to sing the rhyme to me when I was very little. He still repeats it sometimes when he can't think of anything else to say to me. We don't really know each other very well. Papa is away on business a good deal, and when he's home he stays in his study most of the day. Sometimes when he passes me on the stairs, he seems surprised, as if he's forgotten he has a daughter. When we went to the seaside this Easter, I was allowed to play on the beach with 3 other little girls. It was such a treat for me because I'd scarcely played with other children before. I met the girls when we were all queuing for a donkey ride. I was quivering with excitement as I waited. I'd never seen such beautiful animals, so quiet and docile, with big brown eyes and huge ears. My donkey was called Neddy, and he seemed to like me. snuffling quietly when I stroked his neck. I wanted to stay on his back forever. The other girls loved their donkey rides too, and so we all drew donkeys with our tin spades in the damp sand. The other girls were all barefoot with their drawers rolled up to their knees, so I kicked off my shoes and stockings too, and bared my own legs. Perhaps Papa thought this was immodest, because he came hurrying up to us when we started paddling in the sea. "Come along at once, Lucy Lockett, your mother is getting chilly," he said. But he wasn't looking at me. He was talking to one of the other little girls. He thought she was his daughter. We weren't even especially alike, though we were both fair and wore our hair in ringlets. If I hadn't protested, he might have taken that little girl back to our lodgings instead of me. Perhaps he would have preferred her. The new mother certainly would. She's not my mother. Her mamma died when I was a baby, which is very tragic for me, and of course for her. I miss her terribly, even though I didn't have a chance to get to know her very well. I'm sure we would have loved each other more than anything in the world. I don't love my stepmother. I detest her. It is a sin to detest a parent. I have learned the whole of the 10 Commandments over many Sundays, and there it is on the list. Honour thy father and mother and father. I honoured my father, but it's impossible to honour the new mother. I have very vivid memories of the day I first saw her. Papa said he'd met a lovely young lady who was going to be my new mother. We didn't get off to a good start. "Hello, Lucy dear, won't you come and give me a kiss?" she said. I was wary of this beautiful lady with her dark shining hair and her piercing eyes and her fine satin dress. I ducked my head and wouldn't go near her. "Beg pardon, madam, sir. She's just a little shy," said Nurse. "Or perhaps a little wilful," said the new mother silkily. "I think she needs a firm hand." I think I knew from that moment on that I was doomed. When she came home from her honeymoon with Papa, she changed my life forever. "You're getting a big girl now, Lucy. You won't need to be mollycoddled by that old nurse. She's not really suitable. She's far too lax. You can wind her round her little finger. I shall find you a governess." So Miss Groan arrived, and dear Nurse had to leave. We both wept bitterly. "Where will you go, Nurse?" "I'll try to find another position, but it's going to be hard at my age, and I'm not sure your stepmother will give me a good reference. I suppose I'll go back to my village in Sussex. I've got family there," she said, dabbing her eyes. "You're my family, Nurse, and I shall always love you. When I'm a little bigger, I will come and find you, and we will stay together. Then, forever and ever," I said, sobbing. "I will always love you too, Miss Lucy, and never ever forget you," said Nurse. After she left, I cast myself down on the floor and cried for hours. "Really, Lucy, you're far too old for these temper tantrums," said the new mother. "Such a fuss about a silly old nurse. I dare say you'll have forgotten all about her in a couple of months." As if I could ever forget Nurse. She looked after me from when I was born. She was almost like a mother to me, and I loved her very much. She was satisfyingly plump, so I could nestle into her. She was soft, and yet she gave support like a pillow. She smelled a little like a pillow too, of freshly ironed linen and lavender water, with her own warm nursey smell underneath. When I scraped my knees or had a stomachache or woke up in the dark after a bad dream, Nurse would pick me up and cuddle me, and it would all be better in an instant. I didn't mind that I didn't have any friends my own age to play with. I had Nurse instead. She played with my dolls with me, making them talk in tiny voices, and she marched all my Noah's Ark animals up and down, roaring and neighing and trumpeting. She even once had a turn on Rufus, my rocking horse, though he creaked in protest. Nurse kept her own big pot of jam in the cupboard and gave me a spoonful after I had to swallow my nasty medicine. She also spread it onto our bread and butter and flavoured our bland bowls of rice pudding and semolina and tapioca with great dollops of raspberry conserve. She didn't ever punish me severely. If I was clumsy, she'd say something comical like, "Whoops, a blooming buttercup." If I was naughty, she'd touch with her tongue and say, "Really, Lucy, you're a bad little girl today. Let's put you back to bed and then get you up again so it'll be tomorrow and you'll be a good girl again." It worked too. We acted it out, and I made little snorty noises pretending to be asleep. And then Nurse woke me up and she'd say, "Are you my good little girl now?" And I'd yell, "Yes," and then we'd burst out laughing. Nurse and I spent half our time laughing. I don't have anyone to laugh with now. I moped about the house with Nurse when Nurse left, and I was sitting glumly on the stairs when the doctor came to visit the new mother. She wasn't exactly ill, but she was tired all the time, perhaps because she was getting surprisingly stout. The doctor bent down and shook his head at me. "You're looking very peaky, little one," he said. "So pale and wan. No wonder you're not thriving in this sooty old city. I think I shall prescribe some sea air for the whole family." So for Easter, Papa took lodgings at the seaside. I had never been before, and I loved it there. It was wonderful, especially because Miss Groan was not invited. She went to stay with her sister, while Papa and the new mother and I had a holiday. The new mother's maid, Jane, came too, to help me button and lace all my underclothes, and to unbutton and lace each item at night time. She tied up my hair into curling papers at night and brushed my ringlets in the morning, but otherwise she left me alone and concentrated on the new mother. The sea air didn't seem to agree with her, and she spent most of her time reclining on the sofa in the lodgings with the blinds drawn. Papa kept her company, or went out fishing with his gentleman friends. He decided we must go home early. I didn't get to play with the girls on the beach again. I didn't get another ride on Neddy. I wish we didn't have to go home, I said miserably when we were on the train. Haven't got anyone to play with there. For heaven's sake, Lucy, stop moping, said the new mother. Why do you have to make such a fuss about everything? Oh, dear Lord, why does the carriage have to jerk about so, and the seats are so uncomfortable even in first class? My back is aching terribly. There, my dear, said Papa, patting her tenderly. We will be home soon. When she dozed off at last, she turned to me and whispered, I think you might find someone new to play with very soon, Lucy Lockett. I don't understand what he meant, not until a few weeks later. Suddenly the house was in turmoil, the servants running up and down the stairs, and the doctor arriving in his carriage. What's the matter, Miss Groan? I asked. You will find out soon enough, Lucy, she said. Now, let us apply ourselves to our arithmetic. We'll start with simple addition. There was a simple addition to our family that day. The new mother had a new baby. I was taken to see her late that afternoon. The new mother was lying back on her pillows in bed, her black hair about her shoulders, looking beautiful in a new white lace nightgown. She actually smiled at me. Come and meet your little sister, Lucy, she said softly. Hush now, because she's asleep. I crept forward towards the bed. The new mother was holding a white shawl. I could just see a glimpse of pink head through the crochet stitches. She seemed a very little sister. What's her name? I whispered. Angelique, said the new mother proudly. She's our little angel, said Papa, his eyes brimming with tears. Isn't she beautiful? Almost as beautiful as her mother. The new mother uncovered the baby's face. Beautiful? She looked very red and wrinkled to me, but I knew it wouldn't be tactful to say so. She came with an enormous amount of possessions for such a tiny person, endless sets of white clothes, plus bonnets and booties and mittens, and even a tiny white fur-trimmed coat. It was nearly summer when she arrived, as she didn't really need it, but she wore it for the first outing in her perambulator, and Papa laughed delightedly and called her his baby bunting. She does seem exceptionally sweet in her tiny clothes, but she looks a nightmare when they all come off. She doesn't wear drawers, she has to have napkins, and they get an alarming state. I've watched, astonished, while nurse changes her. She is not my nurse. She is a new nurse, just for the baby. She's not a bit like my own dear nurse. This one is gaunt and pinched and wears a starched apron that crackles when she walks. She sleeps in my nurse's old bed. Angelique doesn't sleep in my bed in the nursery. She has a brand new cot with lace curtains by the window. The walls have a new wallpaper, tiny pink rosebuds in a pattern. There are new floral curtains and a fluffy white rug on the floor. It isn't my nursery anymore. It belongs to Angelique now. I have a new schoolroom instead. It is pale green and beige with a desk for me and another for Miss Groan and a blackboard with chalks. It used to be a spare bedroom, very dull. It still is. The tiny room next to it is my new bedroom. I have my books and my dolls and my Noah's Ark crammed in with me, which is cosy, but there's no room for Rufus, my rocking horse. He's to stay in the nursery. I had to give him to Angelique, though I protested fiercely. He won't like it at all. He needs to be exercised every day, and Angelique is still far too little to ride him, I said to Papa and the new mother. Papa chuckled. He likes it when I say childish things, but it irritates the new mother. Really, Lucy dear, you're too old for such nonsense. You know perfectly well that the rocking horse isn't real. You must stop this silly fancy now you're a big girl. Then, could I perhaps ride a real horse? I asked. I've seen girls my age riding ponies in the park. Papa looked at the new mother inquiringly. Oh, please, Papa, I said, jumping up and down. Calm down, Lucy dear. I think you had better concentrate on your lessons with Miss Groan for the moment. We shall think about riding lessons in the summer, said the new mother. She always calls me Lucy dear, but it certainly doesn't sound like an endearment. It's as if she's calling me Lucy Nuisance or Lucy Naughty or Lucy Plague. And now it is summer, but the riding lessons haven't started. It is so hot today, but Miss Groan will only allow me to have the schoolroom windows open a crack. I think she fears I will hurl myself out onto the pavement below. It would be wonderful to be riding my own pony in the shade of the trees. Perhaps we could gallop and I would feel the wind in my hair and cool down a little. I wandered over to the blackboard and started drawing a white pony. I couldn't make his legs go the right way, but I hoped he'd still be able to gallop. He had a very long mane and a wonderful tail, and I coloured him all over, using a lot of white chalk. I liked him so much I couldn't bear to rub him out with a duster, although I knew Miss Groan would be very cross when she saw him, and consider him a criminal waste of chalk. I think writing endless numbers that rarely add, subtract, multiply and divide themselves accurately is much more a waste of chalk. I'd like chalking numbers to play hopscotch. I saw some children playing this game down an alleyway when Miss Groan and I walked to the park. I liked the way they hopped swiftly on one leg for the single squares and landed on 2 feet in the double ones. It looked a very easy game, but great fun. All the children were laughing and shouting. One small girl with short black curls saw me staring and grinned at me. "Come and play," she called. "Oh, Miss Groan, may I begged. She looked astounded. "Of course you can't play, Lucy. Have you taken leave of your senses? They are street children," she hissed, pulling at my arm to try to make me walk right past. "Well, I am in the street, and I am a child, so I can't see why I can't join them," I said, though I knew perfectly well what she meant. I could see that the children weren't very clean, and their clothes were skimpy and ragged. With some of them, they were barefoot. I wished I just wore a short petticoat and didn't have to cram my feet into stockings and kid boots in the summer-time. But I was a rich girl, and they were poor girls, like the counting game. "Come back and play with us," the little girl called after us. "I'm sorry, but I'm not allowed," I called back, horrifying Miss Groan even more. "You mustn't talk to children like that, Lucy," she said. The curly-haired girl had sharp ears. "Don't take any notice of that old goat, Lucy," she shouted. It was so wondrously rude that I burst out laughing. Miss Groan practically tore my arm from my shoulder, dragging me away. She smacked me hard for insolence when we got back home, though I hadn't called her an old goat. I hoped I would see the hopscotch children again, especially the girl with black curly hair, but Miss Groan took another route to the park after that. I did a little hopscotch dance on tiptoe in the schoolroom, landing as lightly as I could because I didn't want to wake Miss Groan. Her snores didn't falter. I wondered if every person in the house was also fast asleep, as if they were all in a fairy story, like Sleeping Beauty. I imagined Papa and the new mother lying side by side on their bed, like those marble people on tombstones in churches. Even little Angelique must be sleeping too, because when she was awake her cries were ear-splitting. Her nurse would be lying on my nurse's old bed, only taking up half the room. Jane and Maggie, the maids, would be sharing a bed upstairs in the attic. Little Lizzie, the kitchen maid, would be lying in her truckle bed in the attic too. Cook never seemed to struggle upstairs on her swollen legs. Perhaps she slept under the big scrubbed table in the kitchen. Mr. Barnaby, the butler, had his own room in the servants' quarters. Billy, the boot boy, didn't have a room at all. Perhaps he had to cram himself into a cupboard when he fancied 40 winks. I never ever slept at rest time. I didn't always sleep at night either. I'd lie wide awake, tossing and turning, wishing Nurse was still here so that I could go and curl up with her. I wondered where she was now. She cried when she said goodbye, though she tried very hard not to, her chin wobbling, her eyes squeezed shut. She still wasn't sure whether she would find another child to nurse. The new mother hadn't given her a very good reference. I begged her to write to me, to let me know how she was getting on, and she promised she would, but she hasn't yet. Maybe the new mother instructed Mr. Barnaby to tear up any letter addressed to Miss Lucy. I wouldn't put it past her. I often peered out of the window, wondering if Nurse could possibly be outside in the street, looking up for me. I went to the window now, leaning my forehead on the glass pane. It was so hot it scorched me. "I expect you're hot too, Ermentrude," I said to the Sunday doll. "Perhaps I'd better put you in the shade." I picked her up, and then nearly dropped her in shock. Chapter 2. Something dreadful had happened to Ermentrude's face. Her eyelids sagged over her blue glass eyes, her nose dribbled down past her lips, and her cheeks oozed to her neck. Her wax had melted in the sunlight. I held the doll at arm's length, tilting her this way and that, hoping her ruined face might just be some trick of the light. She stayed grotesque, her eyes staring at me from beneath her swollen lids. I thrust her back in her cardboard box face down, crumpling her parasol in my haste. Then I backed away from it, terrified she might somehow climb out and point a tiny finger at me accusingly. When Miss Groan awoke at last, I was sitting bolt upright at my desk, turning the whispery pages of my Bible. She was always nagging me about my posture and threatening me with a backboard. "Ah, Lucy," she said, impressed. "Which passage are you reading?" "I don't have a clue. The little black words have been waving up and down, refusing to make any sense." "It's all about God," I said, which seemed a safe guess. Miss Groan nodded approvingly. "And you've put your lovely doll back in the box yourself?" she commented. "Yes, I grew a little tired of playing with her," I said. "Well, you are growing rather old for such childish pursuits," said Miss Groan. She yawned without bothering to hide her gaping mouth, her long face growing even longer. I feel parched after my nap. Let us ring down for some tea, and perhaps a sugar biscuit too. I think you deserve a little treat for being such a good girl. I ate the sugar biscuit, but felt as if it might choke me. Miss Groan had put poor ruined Ermentrude in her usual place at the top of the cupboard, without checking on her. I was safe for now, but what was I going to do next Sunday? I was tormented by the thought as the days went by. If only I could reach the box, smuggle it outside and throw it in a gutter up an alleyway. Then perhaps Miss Groan and the new mother and Papa might think we'd had a burglary. I could even snatch a few trinkets too, to make it seem more convincing. But I was under Miss Groan's surveillance nearly all the time, and remained helpless in the brief moments she was out of the room. I opened the cupboard, but no matter how I tried, I couldn't leap high enough to reach the big cardboard box. I tried teetering on a chair, but still couldn't reach. I attempted climbing up the cupboard shelves like a monkey, but slipped and banged my chin most painfully. I needed a ladder, but the only one I could think of was in the garden shed, and I knew I couldn't possibly drag it into the house and up the stairs without being seen. I was so haunted by the dilemma that I must have seemed like a little ghost. Miss Groan was pleased that I was so quiet and unusually obedient, and the new mother was so absorbed in her beloved Angelique she wouldn't have noticed if I'd disappeared altogether. Papa was home from business. He adored the new baby too, and was forever gurning at her and going coochie-coo in her face. I wondered whether he'd ever made such a fuss of me when I was a baby. Of course he would have been in mourning then. It suddenly occurred to me that he might blame me for my mother's death. "Why are you staring at me like that, Lucy Lockett?" he asked. "I'm sorry, Papa," I said quickly. He peered at me closely. "You're very pale. I wonder if you need some more sea air." "Oh, yes, please, Papa," I cried. The Sunday doll didn't accompany us on holiday. I was only allowed a couple of storybooks for rainy days and my tin bucket and spade. "That's not a good idea, dearest," said the new mother. "Little Angelique is too young for a spell at the seaside. Her skin is far too fine and tender. She would burn no matter how we protected her. Is that not right, nurse?" "Yes, madam," said the new nurse smugly. "I never recommend it for my youngest charges." "Then perhaps just you and I could go on holiday together, Papa," I said hopefully. But he shook his head. "Don't be silly, Lucy Lockett. I could never leave my family," he said. "I'm your family too," I protested silently in my head. So I had to wait it out, madly hoping that after Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday and Saturday, the world would suddenly twirl double fast on its axis and speed past Sunday altogether. But it dawned, as always, and I had to endure it. I was still being so unusually good and subdued that Miss Groan gave me the most interesting and easy set of Bible verses she could think of, about Jesus curing Jairus' daughter. I learned the verses quickly. If Jesus could cure a child, then surely he might be able to give a little doll a new face. Miss Groan caught me kneeling by my bedside praying fervently and seemed astonished by my new piety. "That's enough prayer for now, Lucy. You will have another chance to pray in church this morning," she said, giving my shoulder a little pat. For the first time in my life I wished the interminable service would go on even longer, but it was finished at last, and we walked home for lunch. Even cook seemed to have got wind of my sudden change of character. She didn't quite stretch to giving me my own Yorkshire pudding and roast potato, but she added a pat of butter to my mash and gave me a spoonful of vegetables too. I still had a serving of sloppy milk pudding instead of pie, but I found I had an extra prune. Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich girl, poor girl, beggar girl, thief, doll destroyer. "There now, rest time," said Miss Groan. "I'll get your Sunday doll." "I suddenly feel very sleepy, Miss Groan," I said quickly, giving several artificial yawns. "I think I'll have a proper lie down. I won't need my Sunday doll." "My goodness, Lucy. Well, by all means try to have a nap. I will loosen your dress at the back and help you with your boots. You can just lie on the top of your bed in your undergarments," said Miss Groan. "Thank you very much, Miss Groan," I said fervently. But then I saw she was going to the cupboard and reaching upwards. "I don't need Ermentrude," I said. "I mustn't take her to bed with me, as I don't want her pretty clothes to get spoilt." "What a thoughtful girl. We'll just stand here carefully on your bedside table so she can keep you company," said Miss Groan. "No, please don't get her out. I don't want her looking at me when I'm sleeping," I said wildly. Now," said Miss Groan, taking no notice. She opened the box and gasped. She pulled Ermentrude out, held her to the light and screamed at the sight of her new gargoyle face. "What on earth is the matter?" It was the new mother, bursting into my small bedroom in her petticoats, a shawl around her shoulders. "Why are you screaming?" Miss Groan handed Ermentrude to the new mother wordlessly. "Oh, my lord, the doll's face is ruined, and it cost an absolute fortune. It comes from the finest toy shop in Paris. How did it happen?" The new mother demanded furiously. "I have no idea, madam. It came as such a shock The doll was like that when I opened the box just now, said Miss Groan. The new mother was frowning. And are you saying the doll was in perfect condition when you put it in the box last Sunday? Yes, madam, I swear it, said Miss Groan. Then she put her hand to her mouth. Well, I didn't actually tidy the doll away myself, as far as I recollect. She looked in my direction. I squirmed, clutching the sheets. The new mother looked at me too. I had to fight to stop myself pulling the bed covers right over my head. I looked back at them as fearlessly as I could, although my heart was beating so fast I thought it would burst right out of my camisole. Why are you looking at me? Haven't done anything to poor Ermentrude, I said. I think you have, missy, said the new mother, and she seized me by the wrist and yanked me to my feet. How dare you? You've done it deliberately to spite me. Oh, madam, I can't see how the child would do anything quite as bad as that, said Miss Groan. Not under my watch. To do such damage to the doll's face, she'd have had to attack it with a knife, and I'd never let her keep such an object about her person. The new mother was peering closely at Ermentrude's face. There are no sharp marks. I think the wax has melted. She turned to me. Did you snatch matches from the kitchen to burn her, Lucy? No, of course I didn't. I swear not. On Papa's life, I said. But you did something, didn't you? Said the new mother, sticking her face right into mine, staring deep into my eyes. I know you're hiding something. Confess it at once, or I will whip it out of you. You're not allowed to whip me. You're cruel and hateful, and I wish Papa had never set eyes on you, I shouted. Lucy. It was Papa himself, standing in the doorway in his unbuttoned shirt and braces. See what this child has done to the doll I bought her, said the new mother, brandishing Ermentrude. Whatever has got into you, Lucy? How could you destroy such a precious gift? And I will not have you talking to your poor mamma in such a rude, disrespectful manner, and on the Lord's day. She's not my mamma, I said, and I burst into tears. I don't want a new one. You might have forgotten my real mamma, but I haven't. Come with me, Papa commanded, in a now cruel voice. I shrank from him, but he took hold of me, pulling me off the bed and marching me to the door. He took me downstairs to his study. His braces were still trailing, but he didn't look remotely comical now. I was not allowed in Papa's study. As far as I knew, the new mother didn't go there either. The servants were only permitted to dust and sweep the carpet once a week, and they knew they mustn't shuffle any of Papa's papers or move anything by so much as an inch. I had dared peep inside once and seen Papa's big mahogany desk with its green leather top. He had pens and ink bottles and fine cream paper laid out neatly just so. I'd longed to play at being a writer, but had had the sense not to dare. It would be so easy for my hand to jerk, a pen nib to break, a bottle of ink to spill all over the top of the desk. I would be in very serious trouble. It seemed I was in very serious trouble now. Papa strode into his room, pulling me after him. There was the desk, still set out in precise order. I peered around at the bookshelves of leather volumes, at the etchings of London scenes on the walls, the cabinet of file papers, the big green ashtray for cigar stubs, and the cigar box itself was an exotic lady on the lid, and the glorious great globe in the corner. In normal circumstances, I'd have longed to take down several books and read a page in each, to peer at the pictures, peep in all the cabinet drawers, take a fat cigar from the box and pretend to smoke, tapping it into the green ashtray, and navigate my finger through all the blue patches on the globe until I'd swum the whole world. But now I just stared at Papa, terrified. He opened the biggest drawer in his desk, and I thought he was going to whip me himself. I was in such fear that I very nearly made a puddle on his Turkish carpet there and then. But he wasn't holding a whip. He was holding a photograph in an ornate silver frame. I haven't forgotten your mother, Lucy, he said huskily. Here she is. He held out the photograph to me. I held it very carefully, peering at the lady in the picture. She wasn't quite how I'd imagined. I'd thought she'd have exquisite features and long fair hair down to her slender waist, and she'd wear embroidered silk dresses like the princesses in my fairy tale book. This lady was wearing an ordinary frock and had her hair tied up neatly in a bun. She had dimples in her cheeks, smiling at me as if we were being introduced. Hello, Mamma, I whispered very softly. She seemed the most beautiful woman in the world to me then. Her simple dress with the little lace collar finer than any ball gown. I ached for her to step out of the photograph and put her arms around me. I felt tears trickling down my cheeks. I tried to see some resemblance to myself. Do I look like Mamma, Papa? I asked. Alas, no, child, he said. Why haven't you ever shown me her photograph before, Papa? I didn't want to upset you, Lucy. I feel very sad when I look at her photograph. I have to keep it in a drawer, or I might very well start crying myself, said Papa. I loved your mother dearly. I still do. I will never ever forget her. But now I am lucky enough to have a new beautiful wife, and I love her very much too. As much as Mama, I said, clutching her silver frame. I love them both, said Papa, and now I have 2 little girls, Lucy and Angelique, and I love them both too. Which one of us do you love the most? I asked shakily. I love you equally, said Papa. He paused. At least I did. I looked up at him, trembling. My eyes were so watery I saw double. 2 Papas, both of them stern strangers. What do you mean? I whispered. I find it very hard to love you when you behave appallingly to spite poor Mama, who has tried so hard to please you. How could you have wilfully damaged that beautiful French doll? He said. I didn't, I cried. Will you still persist in telling downright lies, Lucy? Said Papa. It's not a lie. Well, not exactly, I sobbed. Aha, said Papa. I suppose it was my fault that Ermentrude's face got spoilt, but I didn't mean it to happen. I stood her on the windowsill last Sunday when it was very hot and she melted in the sun, I said. You stood her directly in strong sunlight. How could you have been so foolish? What happens when you light a wax candle, child? Papa demanded. It starts to burn, I said. Did your Mama and I not warn you that the doll must never be sat too near the nursery fire? Yes, but that was fire. I didn't think the sunlight could possibly harm her, I said. Where does the sunlight come from, Lucy? The sun, Papa? And what does the sun consist of? He continued sternly. I suppose the sun consists of flames, I whispered. Exactly, said Papa. But I didn't realise at the time. I didn't mean her face to melt. It looks so horrible and scary now. Please forgive me, Papa, I begged. I put my head on one side and looked at him pleadingly. It's a great shame you were so thoughtless about such a special doll, but I can forgive you for such childish carelessness. However, I can't possibly forgive you for saying those terrible words to your Mama. You said she was cruel and hateful, said Papa. You sounded as if you really meant it too. I swallowed. Could I force myself to say I had just been in a passion and that I truly loved the new mother? It was so unfair. I knew full well she didn't love me. She might put on a soft, simpering voice when she spoke to me in front of Papa, but she was often curt and unkind to me behind his back. She's threatened to whip me, I burst out. What wicked nonsense, said Papa. She did, she truly did. Just before you came in the door, you asked Miss Groan, I said. I will do no such thing. I cannot believe you can invent such a wicked story to justify your own base behaviour. I can scarcely believe you're my own little girl. Go back to the schoolroom. I cannot bear to look at you any more, said Papa. He took the photograph from me and gave me a little push away from him. I slunk away. Then I heard a dismal wailing. For a mad moment I thought it was me making the sound, but then I realised it was Angelique. I peeped in the nursery. She was all on her own. No nurse. No new mother. She heard my footsteps and increased her wails, clearly calling to me. I just went over to her beribboned cot. I didn't know how to prepare her bottle of milk. I certainly wasn't going to attempt to change her napkin, but I couldn't just leave her when she sounded so miserable. Perhaps she had a tummy ache and needed a cuddle. I certainly did. I leaned over the cot. She was on her back, red in the face, flailing her little arms. But when she sensed my shadow, she opened her eyes wide and looked at me. Hello, little sister, I whispered. Are you unhappy too? Her tiny starfish hand clutched hold of my finger. Do you want me to pick you up? I asked her. She hung on to me tightly, which seemed to mean yes. I leaned over and put my hands carefully under her armpits, ready to lift her, when there was a shrieking behind me. Don't you dare touch that baby, the nurse shouted, dashing over so quickly I could see her thin ankles in her black wrinkled stockings. She was crying, I said. Did you pinch her? The nurse asked. I stared at her shocked. No, of course not, I said. The nurse elbowed me out of the way and picked Angelique up herself. She peered at her little face. She even lifted her nightgown and examined her scrawny little body. Why are you doing that? Of course I haven't hurt her. She's my sister. I was just going to pick her up to comfort her, I said. Well, you're not allowed to. In any circumstances. Madam's just been giving me her orders. You mustn't even set foot in the nursery, said nurse. But that's so unfair. Angelique likes me. You know she does. When I play peep-bo with her, she laughs, I said. You're not to be trusted now. Not when you've destroyed that lovely dolly deliberately, said nurse. I was so shocked when Madam told me. I've never heard of a child acting so viciously before. It was a total accident, I protested. The doll's face melted in the sun. I'm not going to sit Angelique on the windowsill and wait for the sun to melt her. The nurse gasped. How could you even suggest such a thing? You little child of Satan! I didn't suggest it. I didn't mean I'd do it. I was just saying. I told her, but she didn't understand. Get out of the nursery this minute, she said, wrapping Angelique's shawl around her protectively. Do you want me to call Madam? No. I didn't want her to call the new mother. Then I surely would be whipped. I trailed back to the schoolroom. Miss Groan was there, a Bible in her hands. Oh, Lucy, she said, shaking her head at me. You know I didn't deliberately spoil Ermintrude. I don't. Don't you, Miss Groan? I said with a sob. I'm not sure I know any such thing, said Miss Groan. You've behaved atrociously and shocked us all. Your bad behaviour reflects on me too, even though you haven't been in my charge very long. That old nurse of yours must have spoiled you dreadfully. No, she loved me wondrously, I insisted. Defiant to the last. Sit down and read the Bible, then you might at last repent, said Miss Groan. She gave me a long passage to read about hell. It was very gloomy reading. Many hours seemed to go by before tea time. I always looked forward to Sunday tea because it was the only day I was allowed cake. Sometimes it was jam sponge, sometimes yellow Madeira, sometimes seed cake. I wasn't very keen on seed cake because the little black specks looked worryingly like tiny insects. I knew they weren't, but I tried to avoid them all the same. But today it wasn't seed cake. It wasn't any kind of cake. It was plain bread and butter, just one slice, with half a glass of milk. I was clearly being punished. I looked at Miss Groan's tray. She had a buttered crumpet and a slice of fruit bread and a large portion of jam sponge, my favourite. Stop staring at my food, Lucy, she said. But I'm so hungry, I said mournfully. Well, you shouldn't have been such a naughty girl, said Miss Groan, licking butter from her thin lips. My tummy hurts. I'm so hungry, I said, rubbing it. I put my head on one side. Dear Miss Groan, mayn't I have just 2 bites of your sponge? You have a very big slice. No, you may not, she said, and she took her tray and went off into her bedroom with it where I couldn't plague her. I very much hoped things would be back to normal on Monday, but I found myself still in deep disgrace. I wanted to see Papa to beg him to forgive me, but Miss Groan said he had no wish to see me. The new mother didn't wish to see me neither, but I didn't care about that. I wasn't even allowed to see my baby sister anymore, not even a peek around the nursery door. Angelique's nurse glared ferociously if I even came near now. Oh, how I missed my own lovely nurse. I ached for her to take me in her arms and cuddle me close. She wouldn't ever shun me. She would understand. She would still love me. Now I only had Miss Groan, and she made it clear she found my company abhorrent now. She set me endless general knowledge in geography and scripture tests, and delighted in correcting me when I made mistakes. She savoured her tea-time treats in front of me this time, biting so greedily that blobs of jam dribbled down her big chin. It's bread and butter for you, she told me sternly. No sugar biscuits for bad little girls. Madam won't allow it. Tuesday proved terrible too, and Wednesday was equally woeful. It was Thursday now, and I still only had a solitary slice of bread for my tea. It was gone in 4 gulps. I sighed and wandered over to the window to look out. It was very warm today, but sultry, the sun behind grey clouds. If only the weather had been like this on that Sunday, then Ermintrude would still have a fine face and Papa would still love me. I heaved another great sigh and idly watched the passers-by below me. I saw a mother and a father walking along with a little girl between them. She was holding their hands and chatting merrily while they smiled fondly at her. I wondered if there was any magic spell that would make us change places, so that she would be stuck up here in disgrace while I trotted happily between my fond parents, most likely going home to a splendid tea with 2 slices of sponge cake with jam and cream. I wished it hard, my eyes tight shut, but when I opened my eyes at last I was still in the schoolroom, and the little girl and her parents were almost out of sight. There was another woman going past now, small but bulky, her bonnet faded, her frock plain with several patches at the back, not quite the right blue colour for her dress. Nurse had had a blue dress like that. It was my own dear nurse, walking right past the house. She might well have looked up to see if I was at the window. She might even have waved to me hopefully, but my eyes had been squeezed shut when I was wishing. Now she was walking past, her head bowed, thinking that I hadn't even recognised her. I wanted to bang hard on the window and cry her name, but then Miss Groan would come running. Instead, I gathered my skirts so they would not rustle and crept in my kid boots to the door. Then I was out and along the corridor, past the nursery, down the carpeted stairs, creeping across the gleaming black and white tiles of the hall, tugging hard at the bolt on the big front door, peering round all the time in fear that Mr. Barnaby would spot me and call an alarm. Suddenly, I was outdoors, on the doorstep, in the street. I didn't bother to try to shut the door. I simply ran and ran and ran, seeing Nurse in her blue dress far in the distance now. And that is where we will leave part 1 of The Runaway Girls by Jacqueline Wilson. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.